City police officers are dealing with one of the toughest calls they can get, domestic violence.
5 Alive's Terry Watkins is standing by live at the Oklahoma City Police Communications Center with more on the story. Terry?
Jerry, this week alone, there have been 2 domestic-related homicides in Oklahoma City. 70% of the homicides that police officers have worked in the city this year have been domestic-related. It's a very violent, very
KOCO's Terry Watkins reporting in September of 1985, 40 years ago, and here we are, still talking about the devastating effects of domestic violence. We have a great panel of experts with us here today, 2 people who work on the front lines of this crisis every single day. Lieutenant Daniel Kleehammer, supervising the domestic violence unit at the Oklahoma City Police Department, one of the supervisors of that unit. We appreciate you being here. Also with us here today, Christy Chandler with us, the CEO of the Oklahoma City YWCA, which provides much needed resources and advocacies for victims of domestic violence. Thanks so much, Christy, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You have a shelter also that you run. I mean, really, you are providing life-saving care and resources for people who need it in this community. And I just want to ask you right away, I mean, 40 years ago, that report there, why are we still dealing with this?
Well, you know, YWCA Oklahoma City is about to celebrate 50 years of offering safe housing for people experiencing domestic violence, and unfortunately it's still a very much needed resource. We are one of 32 domestic violence programs across the state, many with housing, lots of us seeing increased requests for services, and very intense kinds of domestic violence experienced in our communities.
I was looking up some of the statistics when it comes to this. There's no good statistics right now. I mean, there's really not. Numbers in some ways we're doing better than around COVID. There was an increase, and I think we're still dealing with some of that from a police perspective, an investigator perspective. Lieutenant, what is the most difficult thing for investigators right now with this crisis?
With investigating incidents of domestic violence, I'd say the biggest challenge that we face as investigators is the continued cooperation from the victim and the people involved in these cases throughout the duration of that investigation. There's countless reasons why a victim would choose not to cooperate after or following an arrest of the offender, and those reasons are completely understandable. I mean, there's fear of retaliation, there's complex dependency dynamics that victims usually have towards their offenders, whether it's finances or emotional dependency or housing, isolation. So as an investigator, if a victim doesn't cooperate with us, we're left with half of an investigation. And that makes it very challenging for the district attorney's office to in turn accept charges when we can't get in-depth interviews with our victims or get critical evidence that we need in order to really complete those investigations. That's probably the biggest challenge that domestic violence investigators face.
And I certainly understand that. And Christy, I know that one of the questions that people often ask that you and other advocates I know bristle at is when people tend to focus and they say, well, why doesn't this person leave? You know, because there's it's kind of code, right, for this person is somehow at fault and choosing to harm themselves as well. And I know, Lieutenant, that's not what you're saying at all, because you're laying it out nicely. But it's a challenging dynamic that people need to realize. There's so many complex factors here, and really the focus needs to be on the abuser is the person who's bringing this to begin with.
That's right. You know, when I think about the most dangerous times for victims of domestic violence, I think about when there's guns in the home, when domestic violence is present.
Sure. We see the statistics.
Yes, a victim is 500 times more likely to die in that situation. When there's strangulation, 700 times more likely to die. And at separation, you know, oftentimes people think the solution is to leave or call police, press charges, get a protective order. That is not the finish line for a victim of domestic violence. That is often the beginning of some very risky threats and violence that need to be considered by victims when they're safety planning for themselves and their children.
We see it so often in some of these stories, the stories that were featured in that story from Elise Jones, which I think she did a great job. Just this week, there was an ex-boyfriend who allegedly went to his ex-girlfriend's house and shot her father. You know, not here in Oklahoma City, but in Oklahoma. I mean, this happens all too often, and I understand, Lieutenant, where it's coming from you is that there are limits to, because you're right. When somebody does say enough's enough, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to do something. I'm going to try to end this. They're still very much at risk, aren't they? I mean, perhaps they don't like to do this because they know that they are in danger, and there are limits by law as to what officers and prosecutors are able to do to protect these people.
Right. Yeah, I mean, obviously we're bound by probable cause, and the district attorney is bound by what they can and cannot charge. And, you know, Christy brought up a good point. We were talking earlier. She said, you know, we're never going to be able to arrest our way out of this problem, out of the problem of domestic violence. And I think what we've been able to do the last 8 years has really made a big difference with the services that the YWCA has provided, with the creation of the Family Justice Center, or Palomar, where we have investigators housed out of and working hand in hand with victim advocates that can provide services and kind of meet the victim where they're at and bridge some of those service
So how does that
gaps.
work? Like, well, give me an example of like a case and how that might
So,
work.
for example, a victim might not initially call 911. They might not report this, but they're Googling and they find out, oh, the Family Justice Center is there and I need help getting a victim's protection order. So they could go there, talk with a navigator or with an advocate, and then we get notified of, hey, there's somebody here that wants to make a police report, and then we can take that report right there and start the investigation. On the back end or on the other side of it, a lot of times we'll receive an arrest or start working an investigation and realize, oh my gosh, this victim's at real risk right now.
Sure.
We need to get this victim plugged in with some services. Maybe it's temporary housing, maybe it's legal aid, maybe it's financial services, something like that, to where we can, like I said, kind of bridge the gap of allowing that victim to remove themselves from the cycle of power and control that the offenders often have over them. So that center really creates a one-stop shop for victims to kind of receive what they need to hopefully end that pattern of violence.
Christy, are there more protections out there, legal protections that could be put in place?
You know, I have a background in working with people who use coercive control and violence in their relationships, and I hold a lot of hope that people can make different choices, because oftentimes the people using harm are only using it with their intimate partner and their children. They're making other choices outside of their home.
Isn't that interesting?
It is very
It's
interesting.
like they're a different person.
They know
Or they act differently towards the people that they're closest with.
They do, and that's strategic so that we don't believe victims when they come forward and tell us the real stories of what's happening behind closed doors. And the lieutenant pointed out, you know, he's over sex crimes, child abuse, or crimes against children, and oftentimes you see the same perpetrator in those crimes as well because they are all overlapping. So I'm really curious about what it might look like when we are doing closer assessments on actual perpetrator behavior, monitoring perpetrator behavior more closely, and escalating those times to a high-risk team. We do have a high-risk team in Oklahoma County, so how might we be able to bolster up those efforts to see about putting the microscope on abusers a bit more?
So instead of maybe being reactionary, trying to catch things a little bit more before it can boil over, identify people who are a problem and stop that.
That's right. And, you know, each of us hold a part of the safety net. The lieutenant was talking about the coordinated efforts. That's so important because what we do know, Oklahoma did a study of homicides, domestic violence homicides, and what we learned is that most people who lose their lives are not in touch with expert domestic violence services like the ones you find at YWCA and Palomar.
Interesting.
So that's first. We've got to make sure that victims are linked in with the proper advocacy services, because oftentimes we are the ones that can help safety plan and help weigh the risks and benefits with a victim and keep them in touch with law enforcement and with prosecution. Those relationships are very important. So I really appreciate the efforts you know, that happen out of Palomar and with these coordinated opportunities that we have in front of us.
Lieutenant, about 30 seconds, has doing the work you've done changed the way you look at policing?
Yeah, it does. I mean, what I can tell you is that I know our department is full of men and women whose primary goal is to hold people accountable, hold offenders accountable for their actions, and to get justice for victims. But so through my work with Palomar, it has been kind of refreshing to see that there are so many more resources available for victims of intimate partner violence. And it's not just, you know, you're seeing an incident on the street and then you make an arrest and you do a report and then you go to the next call and take the next issue. So it is nice to see that there is help available and resources available to really kind of make a long-term difference in these victims' lives.
Thanks to the two of you for being here. More with them on YouTube and our Facebook page, as well as KOCO.com. We're going to leave it here for now. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.